All right. Well, welcome everyone to Figma Workshop number 4. If it is your first time, my name is Dylan. I'm one of your instructors for this workshop series, and I'm joined by my co-instructor.
Oh, hi. My name is Sanjana. I am also teaching Figma class with Dylan and happy to be here.
All right. So let's talk about class schedule really quickly. With the three previous courses that we've had throughout this series, you should have everything you need in order to make a fully functional prototype within Figma. So if you want to make a simulated application on Figma, you should have everything you need to do so. That being said, these next few weeks are going to be teaching some more skills to hopefully build upon. Ideally, you're able to use these skills to make your prototypes even more lifelike and higher fidelity. But also, we're going to be trying to teach you skill sets and thought processes that are going to be used in the industry. So teach you how to approach things from a more professional standpoint. As you can assume, people at Google and Apple are probably not making their frames by hand and like drawing actual squares to put on their page and manually coloring them. So hopefully we're able to teach you how they might approach things. This week, I'm going to be going over components. Next week, Sanjana will be going over auto layout, and then I'll be back for variables on November 5th. That leads into the weekend of November 9th, which is when the UX Club is going to be hosting their Designathon. And I'd highly, highly, highly recommend everyone taking part in this course to sign up for that. I'll have details on how to do that at the end of class if you haven't already. But I think it's just a great way for you to go out and kind of like test your skills and try to see like what you're able to come up with in a limited amount of time. Um, it's going to be a little competitive. There will be judges, which is cool. And there will be a lot of people who make really cool things in Figma that you can learn from. But also, it's going to be really low stakes because I can guarantee that there's going to be a lot of people there who know just as much as you or less than you. And you're going to be able to learn alongside them and work with your peers and try to create something cool. Um, so, all in all, just really, really highly recommend you guys trying to show up to that if you can. And again, details will be mentioned later. And then our last class of the semester will be on the 12th. That will be a special topic. I've brought this up before, but the topic is not defined yet. We'll decide upon that with input from you guys. So we'll be sending out a feedback form in the coming weeks to see if there's any topics that you feel like we should address, something that we haven't gone over, or something that you feel like we didn't spend enough time on. So we'll see what that is about when the time comes. And hopefully we'll see you there. And then a recap of what we did last week. Sanjana went over how to connect your pages. So a lot of you guys made your first prototypes in Figma. So congratulations for everyone who did that. And then we also went over the types of transitions that you can have between pages, as well as how to incorporate overlays into your prototypes, and then how to scroll both vertically and horizontally. And then we went over certificate details in a lot of detail. So if you guys have questions about that, feel free to leave them in chat right now if you want. But also, we did go over it in a lot of detail in the previous class. So there is a YouTube recording of that, and you can find the link to that recording just on the Discord under the recap section of this class. Or if you just go on YouTube and look up UX Club, it will be like the most recent video there. So with that
It's
being,
not.
sorry.
We'll also be posting that specific slide in the Discord and sending it via email. So you guys should definitely have access to it. And if you still have questions, ask us on the Discord about the certificate. So yeah.
Yep. And we'll try to answer as quickly as possible. Sometimes we have to talk before we answer, so it might take a while, but we try. So with all of that being said, let's get into the material today with components. And we'll start by talking about what components are, right? And the way I like to define them is as a documented and reusable building block for creating user interfaces. And what does that mean, right? Well, if you look at any professionally made application, you'll probably notice that it's made of individual elements and like individual building blocks. And if you look at these blocks a little bit more closely, you'll start to see that some of these blocks are very similar, and you'll start to see patterns emerge, and you'll start to see templates being reused. Think about like how item entries look on Amazon. Like different items look like they're laid out the same way. The same goes for songs on Spotify or like various posts on Instagram. All these things are very similar, and they look like they're being reused because designers are doing something called using components. And what this allows a designer to do is every time they solve a problem and design a solution, they're able to save that solution in the case that they need it to use it again later, right? If you create like a login button every time that you need a login button in the future, you can just refer to the first one that you made instead of trying to recreate a login button every single time and trying to come up with a new solution, right? You can just refer back to that initial solution and reuse it. So all in all, a component is a documented and reusable building block for creating user interfaces. Now, why would we actually use components, right? I talked about it kind of in that last slide, but let's get into more specifics. I think it comes down to three main things. The first one is to promote sustainable growth. And what I mean by that is that, like, both within an individual team of just yourself, trying to make your product larger and more extensive, but also within a larger team, say like a large company like Google, we want to make our growth sustainable. We want to be able to grow our product without sacrificing any quality within that product, right? And the easiest way to do this is to use something called a central design system. This is composed of various aspects that we won't get into, including like rules and style guides. But most importantly for us, it also contains something called a component library. And this is where all of your components live, right? Every time you come up with a solution to a problem, you can save it to this library so that yourself and other designers on your team can reuse it later, right? And it's just a way for everyone to be on the same page about how we go about solving problems so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel every time we come to a problem, right? So I said this earlier, but like with a team like Google's, right? If you think about all the products they have between Gmail and Google Drive and Google Photos and all the other suite of details that they or suite of products that they want to make everything feel cohesive. They want to make everything feel like it's made by the same team, right? It'd be really weird if your experience was dysfunctional or disjointed between each of those products. And so the way that they're able to solve this is to ensure that all the teams are using the same component library. You'll see similar assets between all of those different tools, and that makes you feel like you're in a single ecosystem, right? And all of this in conjunction just makes sure that you feel like you're having a better user experience. The second main thing is to increase efficiency, right? If you make a specific asset, so like let's say I'm working on Instagram and I make a like button, right? You'll see a like button a lot throughout Instagram, and you'll see it a lot throughout a designer's pages, right? And if I make that like button and I just copy and paste it on every single page, or on every single page I make a slightly different like button, this doesn't feel great in terms of consistency, but also if I decide that I want to change that like button for whatever reason, whether it's changing the color of the heart or the shape of the heart, I have to go back and manually change all of that throughout every single page. And that can lead to me forgetting certain instances. And that's just like no bueno for everyone involved, right? Instead, I can use a component and I can have the central component just living in the library, right? And then every single time I need to use a like button, I can leave kind of like a placeholder on the page and say, oh, this is a like button, refer to the component in the library. And so every time someone sees that on the page, it just refers to whatever's in the library, and whatever is in the library is what they're going to see on the page. So if I go and change what's on the library, that's reflected across the entire application, and every single instance where I use that like button is now updated, right? And that's done instantly. The second part is that designers and devs are now working from the same reference point. So if I have a login button, I don't have to send the developer I'm working with is just the specific details of that login button, right? I don't need to share color, I don't need to share font or padding or spacing or whatever with the developer, and hope that nothing gets lost in the details or between our communication, right? Instead, I can just tell the developer, hey, I'm using this asset from the library, this specific component, and the developer can go on their own and find that and get all the details from the library, and I don't have to worry about anything getting lost in communication. And then lastly, we're able to focus more on solutions and not designing. And that feels kind of weird to say as a designer, but instead of focusing on the more minute details and some small aspects of your design, like the actual design of your login button or your like button, you can just focus on actually solving the problem at hand, right? If you're designing a login page, the problem isn't, oh, I need to make this login button better. The problem is I need to make the experience of the user logging in better. And you can focus on actually accomplishing that instead of trying to make sure that the login button is as pretty as possible, because that problem has already been solved and you don't need to worry about it, right? And then the last part here is to ensure consistency. I've been working up to this for the duration of the presentation, but all in all, what the user expects is a consistent experience throughout their time on your application, right? So using components can help ensure this. For example, every single time I have a specific need, I can use the same component, right? If you're thinking about like a back button, right? Every time I have the need to go to the previous page on an application, I can use the same back button. And this saves me time because I don't need to redesign the back button. It allows me to be consistent throughout the application because I'm using the same back button for every single time I need to do this. But it also allows the user to understand, hey, if I need to go to the previous page, I can always look for that same back button. They don't need to readjust their expectations, which makes it easier for the user to actually experience your product. It also allows uniform designs between multiple designers. I've kind of talked about this, but in more detail, like if you have a large team and you're all, coming in with your own preconceptions and your own ideas of what ideal design is and all this stuff, it can lead to a dysfunctional and disjointed design, right? I've personally experienced it with Sanjana on a project that we've worked on where we had multiple designers who didn't really know what we are doing, and we all came in with different ideas and ways to go about things. And our end design looked like it was created by three different people. Whereas if you do something like using components, you can ensure that all the assets that you're using work together. And whenever you come to a specific need, you're able to use the same assets, and that helps it helps make your product feel more consistent and cohesive overall, right? And then lastly, it helps with responsiveness across platforms. And what that means is that if I'm designing a login button for a mobile browser, I might need to make a few changes to that button in order for it to function on a desktop browser. I might need to change the dimensions, for example, right? Now, if I were not to use components, that change can get lost, right? I might forget exactly which button is which, or like which one does which platform, or maybe a developer forgets and they use the wrong one in the wrong instance, right? Whereas if I do use components, I can just save both of those designs and then link them together and say like, hey, these both do the exact same thing, but they're for different platforms. And so this one, every single time we're on a mobile page, you'll use this one. Every single time we're on a desktop page, you'll use this one. And that helps not only myself and not only the developer, but then the user at the end doesn't have to expect a new login experience depending on the platform. They can switch their browser between different platforms and feel like they are in the same ecosystem, in the same product, right? And just helps with them overall. So with all of that being said, let's get into the actual material. So there should be a link in the chat. If not, I'll share it with the Figma file. And it's the same file we've been using this whole time in case you have already come to some of these lessons. But yeah, go ahead and hop on. If it's your first time, the password to this Figma file is Figma24, like how I put it in the chat. And I'll give everyone a second to go ahead and join the file. And once you join the file, go ahead and claim a section. If you haven't done so already, you can just double click on anywhere it says student name and type your name. And then if you want to change the background color of your section, feel free to do so that you can easily distinguish your section from other people's sections.
While you guys do that, if at any point in class you fall behind or you need just references of what's happening, I'll keep posting things on the chat. So if you get lost, you can always come back to the chat and see what Dylan has done.
Correct. I'll give it like 20 more seconds. I think a few more people are joining. So again, if you need to name your section, please do, because this is how we're going to be keeping track of attendance. But then also, if you don't know how, just double click anywhere it says student name and type your own name in. Like on the actual place where it says student name. Yeah. I think we are good. Okay. So for this first part, I'm going to ask that you come back to Zoom so that you can see exactly what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. And then I'll ask you to go off and do it on your own. So everyone can come look at my screen again. Okay, so I've been saying components this whole time, And maybe it's clicked in your head, maybe it hasn't, but let's get into an actual demonstration of how this works in Figma. So I have a button here. Everyone has this button on their own screen that they can refer to later, but there's this button in the top left and it just says button. Now, throughout your applications that you make, especially on mobile, you'll probably have a lot of buttons, right? And the odds are that you don't need a new button every single time. You would probably want like a standardized button that maybe has different text, but has the same dimensions and color overall, right? And so if we want to reuse this, I can do a variety of things with this button. I can just copy and paste it everywhere I need, but we're talking about components, right? So how do I actually do that? Well, I just come here, I click on the button. So I'm selecting the whole frame, as you can see on the left side of my screen. And I just right click on it and I go down to create component. You can also do Control Alt K. And that makes this into a component. And what I can do now is I can just paste this anywhere. So if I copy and paste it and drag out that copy, you can see that I have another instance of this component. And I'll talk about how this works. I can also just do copy and paste here. And then I can also just hold Alt on my keyboard and drag a copy of this out. Um, I let go of drags. I let go of Alt, so it dragged the actual thing. Okay, so I have 3 instances of this button now. Now, what does instance mean? That's like an actual term that's used in Figma. So what does that mean? Well, if you look at the first button I have up here on the top left of it, you can see that it's called button, and you'll also see these 4 purple diamonds, right? You'll see the same thing on the left side of my screen, on the left side panel. The one I'm selecting right now has 4 purple diamonds. And what that means is that this is the main component. So earlier when we were talking about a component library, this is the one that would live in the library. These other versions, when you click on them, you don't see the name up here. And if you look on the left, they are highlighted, but they have an empty diamond, right? It's not filled. Same goes for these 2 other instances. And so now we have a relationship between these 2. This is the main component, and these are instances. You can also think of them as this is the parent component, and these are the child components, right? And we say that because anything that happens to the parent is reflected in the children. So if I were to shorten this, you'll see that the children are instantly shorted. If I, for some reason, change the color of the fill here, it's reflected in all the children, and so on and so forth, right? So now I want you to go onto your own screen and just try that out. Make your button a component and then make copies of it. I'll give everyone a few minutes to go ahead and do that. I see some people were already doing it, which is cool. And then just play around with changing the parent and seeing how that change is reflected in the children. I'll give everyone like 20 more seconds to do that because I think most people are getting the hang of it. Actually, I'll give them like 30 more seconds.
If you guys aren't able to figure it out, you can also just leave a comment and I'll come to your space and help you.
Yes. Or if you are particularly struggling, just feel free to unmute yourself and then just be like, hey, I need help here. And I will try to make sure that my instructions are clear.
I see you, Roberto. So if you just so you're clicking on the frame, just right click and you'll see create component. Let me send you a screenshot of this option.
Um, so make sure before we make any copies that we make our component an actual component. So like Sanjana was saying, if you right click on the frame, so in this case, your button, if you select it first and then right click on it, there will be an option that says create component. So when we do that, we know that it's a component because it'll be purple. Everything will turn into purple. Yeah, So I think the majority of us are good. So if Sanjana, you want to do DMs for that or go into
Yeah,
breakout room, that's cool. Um, we'll move on to talking about how the children work. So if everyone can come back to my screen, I will continue here. All right, so hopefully everyone is seeing what I am seeing now. So like I was saying earlier, every change that you make in the parent is reflected in the children. This relationship does not go the other way around. And that's why we say that these are instances and this is the main component, or these are the children and this is the parent. So if I go into an individual child and I change something about it, in this case, let's say the text that is on it, right? And I say sample, that change is not reflected in the parent, right? It's only in this child. It doesn't affect the other children either, right? So if I go in here and I make this a different color for some reason, or if I go in here and I change the shape of it, these changes are individual to the child. That being said, if I change the parent again, I still affect the children, right? So if I go in here and change the color of the text to, let's say, like red, all the children have that same change reflected. Now, that being said, what won't change with the children is any factor that you've already changed about the child, like any specific factor. So in this case, I changed the actual text that is inside the button in this first instance. If I change that within the parent and I say text, that is only changing in the parent and any children where I haven't changed that already. So the same will go for the fill color. So if I change this to bright red here, right, this middle instance doesn't get affected because I've already changed it. And then the same goes for size and shape. It only changes for the first two instances. So everyone go back to your screen and play around with that for a little bit. So I'll give everyone like 1 or 2 minutes to play around with that. And again, if you have any problems, feel free to leave them in chat or just unmute yourself. And as you're playing around with that, I want you to think about how that might actually apply to your designs, right? If you have a parent-child relationship, um, think about all the buttons you might have throughout your design, right? If you make a change to your main component, right, your parent, you're able to affect every single button you have throughout your application at the same time, right? And then, for instance, if you have various different buttons that have different text in them, like you probably would if you have like a login button or a sign up button or a continue button or a back button, right? All these different instances, they might have different text in them, but you can always change the other aspects of them with the parent component, right? So try to make sure you're thinking about how this applies to your own designs. I think that was enough time for you guys to play around with that. So we'll go ahead and continue talking about different things you can do with components. So come back to my screen, please, and thank you. Okay, so hopefully everyone's here. This is something that is from the application that Sunjin and I made for you guys, the prototype that we've been showing off. But this is just like a habit tracker button. And if you guys forgot what this does in the prototype, essentially you can log into your app and then you'll have one of these buttons for every habit that you're trying to track. And whenever you complete it for that day, you just click on it and it changes. It changes, like it fills in with blue. And so I'll teach you guys how to use components in order to do that. So we are going to turn this into a component like we did earlier, but then we're going to do something called making a variant. And we can do that by, again, right-clicking on it and then going to the section that says main component, and we're going to add a variant. I'll have you guys do this in a second. Not quite yet, though. So now you'll see that I have this like purple border around these two different components. And what we've created is called a component set, right? And the idea behind this is that I can have a reusable building block to make my UI, but then I can also have different variants for it. And if you never watched like Loki or anything, essentially, this is just another version of the initial component, right? So um, this can be used in a lot of different varieties or of ways. And what we'll do for this instance is to make it so that this is a filled in version of the first button. And the way we're going to do that is kind of janky, but we're going to take this circle and we're just going to extend it past the borders of our component so that we can see that the circle completely envelops um, this little frame here. And then we're just going to change the color of that fill to whatever color we want. So in this case, a blue. That's not what I wanted. Let's see. I need to select the ellipse. Okay, we're going to change the color of that to blue. And then I'm going to change the color of my icon to white. So if everyone can go and do that, we're going to first make your habit tracker button a component and then add a variant and then adjust it in those ways. If you need me to repeat that, because it was a lot of instructions, feel free to unmute yourself. And obviously, you don't have to use blue. You can use any color you want, but that is what I'm doing for my example. Again, make sure you turn it into a component first, and then you add it as a variant that way. If you need help, please just leave something in the chat or unmute yourself, and I will try to answer your question. How are we doing? Looks like a lot of us have it down. You have one component that's one color and one component that is another color, or at least you're getting there. And that is cool. I'll give it like 20 more seconds. And if you're struggling to do the thing I did with the circle, feel free to just change the color of the background of your second button, because that might be easier. Okay, I think most people are done. So I am going to request that you guys come back to my screen. And if you are not done, if you need a bit more time, feel free to message Sanjana if you have a question. Or if you just know how to do it and you just need more time, feel free to come to my screen first and then get back to what you're doing in a second, because I do not want you to miss this. So if you're looking at what I have now, I have a component set, right? So I have this version of my button, and then I have this version of my button. And this is useful because throughout my application, I might need one or the other. But I don't want to save multiple different components because I don't want to get confused, right? I don't want to like try to find specifically the exact button I need in case I have like 4 different versions of this, right? So if I alt and drag an instance of this component out, right, you can tell it's an instance because on the left-hand side, this diamond is not filled. So this is like a child of this. If I look at the right-hand side on this right-hand panel, you'll see that there's something at the top called property one, and then there's a drop-down menu and it says default. What this is basically a drop-down menu for you to select which version of this component you want. Which version of this component you want. So right now it's set to default, and it says property one. The property, if you click on one of the actual components, if you go into property, you can double click and change the name of it. In this case, I'm going to name it selected, right? Because again, the reason we have these two different buttons is one of them is for whenever you're done with your habit, and one of them is for when you're not done with your habit. So one of them is selected and one of them is not. So the property is going to be called selected. And I'm going to do a thing and just name this first one as false, and then the second one as true, right? So if you think about it, if you look at the property, it says selected. So is this one selected? The first one's false. The second one's true. If everyone can go and do that for their own thing, I'll show you how that works in a second. But if everyone can just rename their properties to true and false. Or not the properties. Rename the property to whatever you want to name it, and then change the name of the actual variant to true and false. And again, if you need help with that, please let me know, because it can be a little deceiving. And make sure
Can you
you're,
say that again? Sorry.
yes. Is there a specific part or just the whole thing?
Just the whole thing.
Okay, sure. So again, if you're looking at my page, if I select this component set, or if I select one of the individual components in the set, you can go into this little property section up on the top right of your screen. For you, it'll say property one, and then it'll say default. You can rename this property by clicking on it and typing whatever you want. In this case, I put selected. And then you can change the name of the actual variant by clicking on this dropdown, like within the dropdown menu, not the actual dropdown. And then you can go to your second variant and then also change the name of that. Yeah, this specific class can have a lot of instructions. So please feel free to ask questions, because it can be easy to get lost. Yeah. And make sure you're working within the component set, because the instance that you made, like the third one per se, is not going to allow you to change all of that stuff, that information. You have to work within the component set.
I think we should pause for a minute
Uh,
and see a lot of people that
sure.
have made.
Yeah. Um, looks like a good amount of us have it down. If you don't have it down, again, feel free to leave a chat message or just unmute yourself. There's no problems with going over this again.
Quick thing, when you guys are trying to make children from your components, maybe just try to copy and paste outside the section. Sometimes when you drag, it might make another variant.
Yes, but specifically when you're doing copy and paste, don't do Control C, Control V, because that will make another variant. So copy it and then click to paste somewhere else.
Yeah, just go outside of the space and try.
Um, okay, so I think a lot of us have it down. If not, again, feel free to message Sanjana or just leave it in the chat and she'll help you. But now that you have that, if you go to your instance outside of your component set, so the copy that we made, if you go to the top right, you'll see that now, instead of a drop-down menu, because we put true and false for our values within the component set, there's like a toggle now. So you'll see whatever you named the property, and then you'll see a toggle next to it. And if you click on that toggle, it'll switch between the different variants. And I see some of you already found that, but just test that out and see how that works, if it works. But yeah, you're able to switch between two variants like that. So, if there are specific instances where you need one variant in your design, you can toggle it to whatever one you want. And then obviously, if you have more than two, the toggle won't work because you can't just have true or false if there's more than two variants. And we'll talk about that later, but there's also a use case for that. So hopefully you've had a bit of time to play with that toggle button, and you can come back to my screen here. I'm now going to talk about something called component prototyping. And what this means is that you can do a lot of the stuff we learned last week with Sanjana in prototyping. We can do that within a component set, right? So like I was talking about earlier, the way that this button works, specifically in the prototype that we created, was that you click on this button and then it fills in, right? And if you think about what you know now about prototyping and how you would approach that in an actual, Figma application, uh, it might get confusing. Like, what do you do? How do you get there, right? Do I make a new page for the filled-in version? That like can get really complicated. So I'm here to tell you that it's actually very simple. And all you have to do is you go to your component set. So I have my component set here. I just go to prototype. I'm just going to do the same thing that we were doing last week. So I'm going to drag a line from this version of the component to this version of the component. And I'm going to say that on tap, I'm going to change to. So that's a new action. So instead of doing navigate to like you guys were doing earlier or open overlay, I'm going to click change to, and it's going to be selected. So there's a toggle right there, but just know that that toggle and it being on represents the second variant. And I'm going to say smart animate. And I'm going to do the same thing in reverse. So I'm going to go from this filled in version. I'm going to drag over to the unfilled version. I'll say on tap, change to not selected, and smart animate. And then before you guys leave, I'm going to drag this instance over into a test page that I have. And I'm going to open up with a starting point. And then I'm going to click on it, and you guys can now see how that works, right? And it's just working within the component. It's not changing pages. It's just working within the component. So if everyone can go and try that out. Again, if you need me to repeat instructions because there were a lot of instructions there, feel free to ask.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I need some help.
Okay. But what is it that you need help with?
I need help with the arrow.
With the arrow. Okay. So if you go into the prototyping tab, so that's at the top right of your screen. So there's design and prototype. If you click on prototype, whenever you
So where's
are
the prototype tab?
at the top right of your screen.
Top right. Design. Prototype, yes.
Yep. So if you click on that, you'll see different things on your screen. And whenever you highlight over one of your components, you'll see that there are.
Thank you for letting me know. I understood.
Okay, cool. So hopefully everyone's able to test that out and see how switching between those two works and how that might work in applications, right? So like a short little story about me, the first like big project I worked on had a bunch of pages for like different artists, and I had a like button on each of those pages. And I didn't understand components at the time. Like I didn't know how that worked at all. I was like brand new to Figma and I'm working on my first big project. And instead of using something like this where, it just switches components for liking and unliking an artist, I literally had a new page for every single artist for having the like button filled. So every artist had two pages. They had one page with the like button not filled and one with it filled. And it increased my page count by like 20. And it was terrible. How do I test it in the prototype again? Just drag your instance into one of those test pages that I provided for you. And then if you go into the prototype tab, if you are like selecting one of those frames, there'll be an option to add a starting point, or you can just click present and then it'll open up a new tab and you can see it there. But I like to just add the starting point, and then the starting point will pop up on like the top left of your page. So it'll be the name of the flow, and then next to that name is like a play button icon, and you just click on that and it'll open up a mini player. Hopefully that answered your question. Cool. All right. So I'll give everyone a little bit more time to work on that before we delve into the next thing.
Do we have time, Dylan? I think some people are still stuck on the toggle.
Some people are still stuck on the toggle. Um,
If you could just show how you set the properties again.
How do I create an instance into a page? Okay, so I'll answer the instance question first. Just make an instance. So you can do that just by copying something from your component set. So I'll copy like this first button, and then outside of it, I'll paste here. So that'll make another instance. And then you can just copy paste your instances if you want. And then with the toggle thing, yeah, so if I go into my component set within the design tab, right? So make sure I'm not on prototype, make sure I'm in design. If I go into the component set and I click on one of the components, at the top left, there will be a property. So on yours, it'll say property 1. You can change the name of that or not. It doesn't really matter. But in the second slot, in the drop-down menu, is the name of this specific variant that you're selecting. And so you can change that to true or false. And then if you click on the other component in the set, you can change that to whichever of the first one, whichever true or false that you didn't use. So one of them should be true and one of them should be false. And that should give you the toggle. Let's see. How are people feeling? Do things make sense so far? It looks like a lot of us have an instance created, and hopefully you're able to see that instance work in a prototype. Again, if I'm going too fast, feel free to leave something in the chat and I'll slow down.
Just real quick, if you're trying to make an instance, try doing Alt drag. It works better than copy paste. I think some people are struggling with that. So just click on the element, hold Alt on your keyboard, and drag it outside.
And then let go of the click before you let go of Alt.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll give everyone like 20 more seconds to play around with the prototype. Okay. Hopefully that was enough time for everyone to play with the prototype. If not, you'll always have more time after the lesson. And I'll be around in case there are any more questions. But for now, in the interest of time, let's move on a little bit. So if you can come back to my screen, that would be great. I'm going to show you guys how to make another version of variants, right? There are going to be instances where maybe all your variants don't look exactly the same. Like you can't just make a variant of one of your components and then change it into what you need. So let's see how to do that. So if you're looking at my screen, I have these 6 little icons, and this is what we used in our calendar on our application. So we have like different markers that mean different things. Only 3 of them are here right now, but in total we have 6. So how do I make all of these into a component set, right? So that I don't have to manually copy and paste each of the icons into my calendar because that would take forever. Well, I do that by making this first one a component. So I, again, go and create a component. And then in the top right of my screen, there's this thing that says add property. And there is a plus sign next to it. So if I click on that plus sign, I can add variant. And I could have done this for the other component, but um, it wouldn't have made another variant for me to edit. So I'm just going to move everything over slightly. And I'm going to choose this, and I'm going to drag the box to be bigger so it can accommodate all 6 of these. And then with each of these individual components, I'm going to turn them all into components individually, because if you select all of them and then click create component, it's going to turn all of them into a singular component. So I'm going to make all of them components individually. And there's one that's labeled 6. It is empty, and that is intentional. But once I'm done with that, I'm going to drag all of those into my little perimeter, my purple perimeter. So if everyone can go and do that, that'd be great. Again, if you need the instructions repeated, please just speak up. And if you feel like you're falling behind, no worries. We'll be here after class to answer any questions you have, go over anything you might have missed, and there's always going to be a recording online. So like I said, you just have to make the first one a component, and then go into select that first one, go to the top right. There's a thing that says, I think, properties, and then click the plus sign next to properties, and then add a variant. Let's see how people are doing. Good. Looks like you're getting there. And make sure you make those 5 other variants, make sure you turn them each into components individually prior to dragging them into that border, because it will not register otherwise. And you can tell that they're going to be registered because they won't have the names above them anymore. So again, make sure they become components prior to you putting them inside of the border. And if you need help with anything, do not hesitate to ask, because that is the only way I will know if you need help. I'll give it another minute for anyone who needs to get that done. And I know this class is a little bit faster paced than our other classes because there's more material and it's a bit more complex. So hopefully this pacing is okay for you guys. And if not, we'll change it for future classes. And there's always the video recording. Okay. Hopefully everyone was able to figure that out. It looks like most of the people I'm seeing were able to figure it out, which is great. And then you guys can come back to my screen and see how this would be used. So I'll give you a second to hop back on over to Zoom. Hopefully you're here by now. I can't get the border for some reason. Let's see, Brooklyn. We'll quickly address this. Okay, so you do have the border, and you just have to select this and then drag it to be bigger. Nope. So yeah, so just select the border and then actually drag the side of it. Yeah, there you go. and just bring everything inside because it looks like everything else is a component. Doing great. Okay, so if you hop back on my stream on Zoom, this is how you would actually use it. So if I grab an instance of one of these, so I'm going to grab an instance of the first one. Again, I can do that by holding Alt on my keyboard and then dragging one of them out. This is an instance. You can tell because on the left side, that diamond is empty. On the right side over here, you'll see that the property is just called property1. I'm not going to rename it for right now just because we don't need to. And if you look at the drop-down menu, there's a bunch of different options, right? There's default through and 2 through 6 because I haven't renamed them. So if I click around, you can see that there's different options here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change it to, let's keep it on default. I'm going to keep it on default, and then I'm going to copy this. So I'm going to copy, and I'm going to go down to this calendar that I have. So you guys all also have this on your screen. I'm going to hold Control on my keyboard, and I'm just going to highlight all of these little circles. So I'm only highlighting the circles. You can tell because that's the only thing that's highlighted here. Again, I just held Control to do that. You guys will do it in a second. And I'm going to right-click on one of them and then click Paste to replace. So now all of these are instances of my components, right? And because we have that set up, I can go into one of these circles individually if I click, and I can just change its settings to any other variant, right? So you can imagine how useful this would be if you have like a huge thing like this and I need to change them individually because they all represent different things. How useful it would be to be able to manually change them and keep them as a component, right? Because like in the case that I want my fourth variant to be different, I just have to go in here and change the actual main component, right? If I go into design and if I change, let's say like the color of it, if I change it to red, that will reflect every single time I have it anywhere else. And I don't have to worry about going back to manually replace this because that would be annoying. So if everyone can go do that on their own calendar, again, all I did was make an instance of one of my variants, and then I copied that instance. I highlighted all of the dots in my calendar by holding Control and highlighting everything, and then pasting to replace. How do I make an instance of component? Yep, so just go to my component set. I hold Alt on my keyboard. I grab one of them. I drag it outside of the component set. I release it and then let go of Alt on my keyboard. And that'll make an instance. And then you just copy that and then highlight all of the circles on your calendar by holding Control and highlighting everything and then pasting to replace. Make sure you say paste to replace, not just paste. And then once you have done that, feel free to play around with them individually. It might be hard to select like an individual circle because you have to fight through a lot of layers to get there, but just keep on clicking until you're just highlighting a single circle. Mm-hmm.
Um,
Again, if you have any problems, feel free to unmute or just leave a chat. But it looks like we are doing okay. Wait, I'm still... Okay, wait, I'm still so confused. How did you get all the calendar circles instances of the components? Okay, so
sorry, I was looking at your stuff, Kavya, real quick. So I think the issue was you didn't have the variance in your component. So all I'm doing is, sorry, let me share my screen real quick.
okay.
So if you see right here, this one is a component and it's not a variant inside your component, right? So all I'm doing is just taking it out, putting it back in here until that goes away. So if you see on my left panel now, I know it's an instance. So I know that it's a variant. So all of these are variants. And then this last one, I'll do that too. Just drag it and put it back until it goes away. Okay, I'll just skip that for now. But then this is also a component. So I'm gonna delete this. Click on this, hold Alt. You'll see the two little arrows, drag out. Now I've made an instance, double checking, it's an open diamond. Then you can select everything and paste to replace. So just try that and let me know if it works. So again, if it's not working for you guys, make sure that it's this little diamond is inside your big component without the, like this shouldn't be there, basically. They should all look like this. And it should work.
Okay, I am going to reshare and then open chat. Okay, so Rayan, you might be good now, but yeah. So yeah, just make sure you're only selecting the circles, and then if you right click, there should be an option under paste that says paste or replace. I'm not sure if you see that or not. But yeah, if anyone else has a problem, still don't see it. Okay, let's see. If you look at my screen, let's see what the problem is. Okay, so if I come in and I select just all the circles, and I right click, right under paste here is paste to replace. So Control Shift R. And if I paste, then it changes to all of my components. It might be because you're like highlighting, like, actually that shouldn't affect anything. But yeah, just make sure you're holding Shift and highlighting just the circles. And then right clicking and then under, oh, do you have anything copied? That might be the problem. Make sure you copied this instance first. A bunch of buttons are placed. Well, okay, so okay, so for the person who just left the chat, make sure that you copied an instance of your component prior to pasting to replace, because you probably, yeah, yes, okay. Okay, so I know we came up in an hour, and some of you guys might not have time, but I am going to continue instruction with a few more things, just in case you want to stay behind and learn. But if not, then please be sure to fill out our feedback form. I'm currently sharing it on my screen with a QR code, and then there is also a QR code for the design-a-thon. Again, like we're basing what we do in these classes off of what you guys are telling us in feedback. So please fill that out. And then make sure to sign up for the design-a-thon. And if you do have time, I'm going to continue instruction. But Sanjana will leave a link to both of those things in the chat in case you didn't catch that. Okay. So one of the two last things I want to teach is something called it's more navigation, right? So if you come back to my Zoom feed, I'm going to show you guys something kind of cool. Okay. So I have this nav bar here. We skipped over it earlier because we didn't have time, but now that you're here and watching, I'm going to show you how to use this, right? So if you think about most like mobile applications, you'll probably have a nav bar. If you think about like Instagram, on the bottom of Instagram, there's a nav bar, there's like a home page, or an explore page, so on and so forth. So we can do the same thing that we were doing with this button for prototyping, but we can do it for navigation, right? So if I'm looking at this, this can be made into a component, right? So I just turn it into a component, and then I can go to prototype, and I can select just like a single one of these boxes. So each of these boxes you can think of as a button. So the first box, the red one, I'm going to drag this line over to my red page. I made it very, very simple for you guys to see. It's just red to red. And then I'll do on tap, navigate to. Smart animation doesn't really matter. You can do whatever animation you want, but it is going to the red page. And then, as you guys might have guessed, blue goes to blue, and then green goes to green. Now that I have those three interactions set up, if I come back to design, if I make an instance of this nav bar and I drag it to, oh, I did an oopsie. If I make an instance of this nav bar and I drag it to the first page, and if I copy that and then put it on the second page and the third page. If I now go into the prototype of these pages, I can navigate around to the pages just by clicking on whatever navigation button I want. And so I'm going to have you guys go ahead and try that out. And again, that was kind of a lot of instructions. So I'll be here in case you have any confusion. The first step is making your nav bar into a component. And then you go into prototype and then just drag the arrows to the corresponding colored page. Should be very simple, but understandable if you have problems. So the first step, again, to highlight the entirety of your nav bar and turn that whole thing into a component. So you should see that it's purple after you turn it into a component. And then you want to make an instance of it after you set up your navigation. And then take that instance and put it on one of your pages, and then you just copy and paste it to the other pages. If you're having problems, feel free to speak up. I'll be going around and seeing if anyone needs help. Let's see. All right. And again, after you turn that first one into a component, make sure you set up the prototyping. So go to your first button, drag a line over to the first page, go to your second button, drag a line to the second page, and so on and so forth. And after that, make instances of it and bring it over to your pages. And then you can view it in the same way that we were viewing our button earlier by opening the mini player or just opening the whole presentation screen. Okay, looks like we're doing all right. Sanjana keeps on joining and leaving. All right. I think a lot of us have it down. If you don't have it down, feel free to leave a chat message and I can help you out. Otherwise, I'm not going to know you're struggling and I am going to move on. Again, after you set up the prototyping, make sure to make an instance of your component. You can do that by just holding Alt on your keyboard, dragging your nav bar out, letting go of your nav bar, and then letting go of Alt. And then you can move that to your pages. All right. I think most of us have it down. And I am going to take that as a sign to move on. But if you do need help, leave a message and I will get back to you. Okay. So one last thing I want to cover in this class is something called a nested component, right? And I'll explain what that is very shortly if you come and look at my screen. Okay. Hopefully you are looking at my screen now. Okay, so with these buttons, I told you earlier that their use was to track specific habits, right? So in this case, there's a water droplet. You can probably tell that it is for drinking water, right? That was what we used in our example. But what happens if I want to use the same concept, right? I want to have it be able to flip back and forth between different habits or different like fulfillment statuses, but I want to use it for different habits, right? How would I go about doing that? Well, what I can do is nest a component, right? So if you look at the construction of how I made this, you'll see that within the layers, there's like a frame, but then there's also something called a habit icon. You can see this on the left side of my screen. The habit icon is in itself a component. This is an instance of a component, and the main component is down here. So right now, I just have it set to a single component, but if I go ahead and I turn this into a variant set, and I add 2 icons to it, so I make this into a component and make this into a component, and I drag this to, oh my goodness, not that. If I drag this to be open and I bring, am I doing this wrong? Okay, if I bring this into here, cool, that is one variant. If I bring this into here, that is another variant. So now if I go into this instance over here, and I look at, if I look at what's going on, I think I'm already set it up, which is unfortunate, but there should be a thing that up here says, let's see if I just like, if I can turn that off somehow. Apologies, stay with me for a second. If I just delete this and then make another instance, is it going to be the same? It is. Okay, maybe, oh, I think I know what I did. Okay, so if I go into the component set up here, so if I select this whole thing, this whole frame, if I go to the top right, there's properties, and this is what we did earlier to add a variant. But if I go here and click add, there's a bottom option that says nested instances. And what happens if I click this is it allows me to choose what nested instance. In this case, I only have one, and that opens the habit icon. And so now that I have that, whenever I look at an instance of my component, I can choose whether it's selected or not, but I can also choose which icon I'm using. So I can change it between meditate and the default, which is water, and also reading. And I can choose whether it's selected or not, and it'll change for me, right? So that's kind of janky, but we're going to ignore that. So if everyone can go do that on their own, that was a lot of steps. So I'm going to walk back through them as you need. The first thing I did was I went to the bottom of my page where the water droplet icon is. I turned that into a component set, and I added the 2 other icons to it. So if everyone can start with that. I know some of us were struggling with that a little bit earlier, so hopefully having another chance to do it will help you understand exactly how that works. Again, choose that first component, the water droplet, go to the top right of your page. It'll say something like properties. And if you click the plus sign, you can choose the variant option, and it'll give you that purple perimeter. And then you just drag that purple perimeter to be larger, and you turn the 2 other icons into components as well, and then you drag those into the purple perimeter. I think a good amount of us have that done. After that, you are going to go into the habit tracker. So just click on the word habit tracker. That should highlight the entire component set that you have for your 2 big buttons. If you have that highlighted and you go to the top right under properties, there's a plus button. You click on that plus button and you go to the last option. It says nested instances. You click on that, and then you choose habit icon, I think. It should be the only option there. So just check that, and then you confirm. And then when you go to your instance, you should be able to see that there is a nested property in there. And if you think about how this might apply to your other designs, this can get as complex as you want it to be, right? You can have nested upon nested upon nested components and properties. And you can choose which ones you're able to see from which layer, right? It can get really complex, or it can be as simple as you want it. And so then you can change different properties of your instance just from its main page instead of having to go in and dig through different layers to get to everything. But with that being said, I think I'm going to officially wrap up my yapping. The material for today is complete, and we can stop the recording.